Next up we have John O'Donnell. John is a senior geophysicist within our Earth Observation and Imaging Group at GSWA. He is currently working on our WA Array program, and you would have seen him in the South Foyer, which, as the Minister mentioned, once complete, will be one of the largest passive seismic surveys in the world. Thanks, John.
Morning, everyone. I'll also start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet and work. So WA Array. This is a statewide passive seismic survey. I'm speaking on behalf of the team today, but it does take a village to raise a seismic survey on this scale. Ruth is our project manager. YU, Reza, and I, we spend a lot of our time looking at seismic squiggles. Mike could be described as our quartermaster, and Melissa has been very helpful in coordinating aspects of the field work from the Kalgoorlie office. And Simon is our project director. So, why the rationale for a statewide passive seismic survey at this juncture? So the rationale is really, it's rooted in this consensus which has emerged, pointing to a genetic link between the deep architecture of tectonic plates and giant mineral systems. And in the case of Australia, that's typified by this figure shown on your right. So this was published by Mark Hoggard and others, a sizable contingent from GA back in 2020. So it shows base metal deposits. They're coded by type, size, and age, and that's superimposed on a model of lithospheric thickness derived from a seismic tomography model. So the blue colors represent thick, old lithosphere, and the red or warmer colors represent younger lithosphere. And there's undeniably a compelling spatial correlation. So especially if you're to look in the northeast cratonic margin. And it's the author's contention that 85% of sediment-hosted base metals, including all giant deposits, occur within 200 kilometers of the transition between thick and thin lithosphere. So that's the impetus. But unfortunately for us here in WA, it's not going to be as simple as exploring along the dotted line. And to understand why, you've got to understand the seismic data that went into the creation of the model in the first place. So it was quite sparse and quite non-uniform. So this slide, it shows it's a chronology of passive seismic arrays that were deployed across Australia from the inception of the broadband digital era in the mid-90s. So a lot of that work was spearheaded in the beginning by ANU, the ANU Seismology Group. GA subsequently became more involved. The red squares are the National Telemetered Seismic Network. And then the state surveys became more involved as well. So we had, for example, arrays that Ruth and YU here were involved in across the Capricorn, the Pilbara, the Albany-Fraser. But at the statewide level, we're still lacking that uniform, sufficiently dense coverage to build a high-fidelity model of the lithosphere that we could use to robustly interrogate for mineral exploration purposes. So there are two conspicuous arrays that you can see in the map. So the purple, I suppose, the purple square colors, that's the GA, the 2-degree array. That's a national seismic array that was rolled out about a year and a half ago at 200 kilometers spacing. And then here in WA, we've got the WA array. So that's in the southwest corner, the yellow triangles. So we deployed 165 passive seismic stations last October, November at a 40-kilometer spacing across the southwest. The idea is to roll this across the state over the next 10 years, covering 9 phases, which would give a total of 1,500 plus broadband seismic stations total. So we've begun in the southwest. We're going to pick those up the week after next. They're going to come back to Perth. We're going to dust them off over the Christmas period. And then in Feb, we head to the phase 2 region, which is this L-shaped eastern goldfields region wrapping around the southwest. In year 3, we head to the central east. And after that, I believe it remains to be determined. So like I said, phase one was deployed in October, November 2020. This is what a typical passive seismic station looks like. So we dig a hole maybe 50 centimeters deep. We put a paver in there to provide a solid base for the seismometer and good coupling with the ground. These are 3-component broadband instruments, so they record motion in 3 directions to record the 3-dimensional wave field, so up, down, and 2 horizontals. We've got a digitizer that sits inside a Peli case, and it's a USB stick, so we record the USB. We've got a GPS clock such that we have accurate synchronized timing across the whole array. Solar panel and battery to keep the show on the road, and a protective enclosure to ensure that no cables get chewed and so on. So we're still in the data collection phase. So what will the data look like? So passive seismology is traditionally the use of earthquakes to infer earth structure. And like I said, these instruments, they record continuously at 100 samples per second in 3 directions. So Z, up, down, northeast, or north-south rather, and east-west. So this was an earthquake that was captured on WA array stations back in January of this year. This was a magnitude 4.5 in the vicinity of Narangara. And we can readily interpret these seismograms and understand what's going on, knowing very little about seismology. So when an earthquake occurs, it generates 3 types of waves. So we've got a compressional wave, or a P wave. We've got a shear wave, or an S wave, and then we get a surface wave that trundles along the surface. So the P waves, those compressional waves, travel fastest, up to 6.5 kilometers per second in the crystalline crust. Shear waves, maybe 3.5 kilometers per second in the crust, and then the surface waves roll along behind that. And you can clearly see them turning up on all 3 components. This is the same earthquake, but we're now looking at a station that's further away. So this is north of Northam. Again, we see the P, the S, and the surface waves. I can step further away again. This is out the northeast extent of the ray. The P, the S, and the surface waves, they separate in time because of the different speeds, but also the character of the waves changes slightly. This is the imprint of the geology according to the particular path, and that's what we seek to decode to build models, 3D models of the lithosphere. So I'm now going to zoom out, looking at the vertical component only. This is about 2 days in the life of a particular WA array seismic station. So each of these lines represents 1 hour. This is going back to early Feb. We had a 4.1 earthquake in Arthur River. Then we can see a couple of aftershocks. And then we see these huge, conspicuous wave trains on the 6th of Feb. So again, these waves separate as they travel. So this is the signature of something very big from very far away. So this was the Turkey earthquake, so the magnitude 7.8 followed by the magnitude 7.5, which were devastating. If I step closer, we're now maybe 40 kilometers from the actual the Arthur River event. So we begin to pick up more aftershocks, and again we see the signatures of the Turkey earthquakes. And as we get closer again, ever more aftershocks. So more resolution, more stations, more information. What do we do with this? Seismology is very simple in a nutshell. It's wave speed is equal to distance over time. So if I have an earthquake, I can record the time at which it arrives at each of these stations. Speed tells me something about the geology. Not only doing it from earthquake to station, but between stations as well. Because we're still in the collection phase with WA Array, I'm going to lean on some of our GSWA's telemetered sites. This is to improve live feed coverage across the state. So this was a station Ruth and I installed at Tropicana Gold Mine back earlier this year. So when this shows the seismogram associated with the Morocco earthquake, another devastating earthquake that occurred back in September. Now, the The relative arrival of the waves still holds. So P's are faster than S, which are faster than surface waves. But it's a bit more nuanced here because we've got the deep internal layering of the Earth complicating things. So there's no direct path for a P wave to travel exclusively through the rocky component of the Earth, so the crust and mantle. So the first portion of the P wave to arrive at Tropicana has bounced once under the underside of the Earth's surface. This is the PP arrival. For a direct wave to arrive, it has to transit through the metallic core. This is the PKIKP phase. And it's an incredible thought that we live in a time where we can record that. That's a couple of microns, and we can understand it. And again, following that, we've got the surface waves. Our surface waves are one of our most valuable tools for mapping the lithosphere. And to explain why, I'm going to take an example from another of our telemetered stations. This is Beacon. This is a large earthquake that occurred offshore New Zealand. And you see this real textbook example of a surface wave where it's kind of drawn out, accordion bellows-like, at earlier times, and then the higher frequency energy arrives later. That's extremely valuable to us. So why? I can make that more explicit by actually just looking at in a number of different frequency bands. So these are you can think of these as the bass notes, and these the treble notes. The sum of these will give you the surface wave at the top. So surface waves are so valuable because the different frequency components are sensitive to different depths within the Earth. So for example, 125 second being the period, the time between successive peaks, it's traveling in the lower lithosphere. So traveling laterally within the lower lithosphere. A 20-second surface wave is sensitive to the lower crust or the top of the upper mantle. So we have all these surface waves crisscrossing our array from all these earthquakes that are happening around the Pacific Rim of Fire and further afield, and each of them yielding a huge amount of information. And again, all we're doing, wave speed is equal to distance over time. So there's a rationale behind me showing these seismograms. WA array, it's been illuminated from within by local earthquakes. From the huge teleseismic earthquakes, we've got body waves coming up from below, and then we've got surface waves washing across it that are sensitive to different depths. This is what it allows us to build a picture of the three-dimensional structure of the plate, which will then allow us to nail down where these cratonic margins, translithospheric faults, crustal domains, all that good stuff where it is. Again, we're in the collection phase, but it's I suppose, a sneak peek at some work that YU has been doing. So Simon alluded to earlier on the SWAN, so the Southwest Australia Passive Seismic Network. This was deployed, I think it was back in 2020, collaboration between ANU and GSWA. 25 broadband stations across the wheat belt to understand lithospheric structure and the origin of seismicity. So this is a cross-section along that random profile, just straddling the array from the southwest to the northeast. This particular technique, it's sensitive, receiver functions, it's sensitive to the layering, or seismic impedance contrasts. I'm just going to draw your attention, because it is preliminary, this will change. This is the MOHO, so the crust mantle transition. That's 2.5 years of data, 25 stations across the wheat belt. This is 6 months of WA array. And I mean, the enhancement speaks for itself. And this is a 2D cross-section of crustal structure. We're doing this in 3 dimensions for the entire lithosphere. So we deploy the instruments for a year at a time, the reason being that we need that time span to gather enough earthquake data. We get about 150 magnitude 6 earthquakes a year. We'll make the raw time series available after 1 year, so we've got to iron out the wrinkles. But in the meantime, we will be working with collaborators from CSIRO and ANU on developing these products. So for the Southwest region, these will be available by this time next year. WA array, it really is the seismic elephant in the room for us at GSWA, but we do have other complementary programs that are ongoing at the same time. So we've got our national, our GSWA is one of our contributions to the national telemetry network in the Kimberley, for example. We've got similar stations across the wheat belt and around Kalgoorlie. We've recently procured a rapid deployment aftershock monitoring kit because big earthquakes do occur across the wheat belt, and they will in the future. If we can map the aftershock sequences, we can better see where those faults are. And we're also hoping to take on the GA, the 2-degree backbone network, take those on and telemetry them for the duration of WA array to help stitch all these disparate model regions together. So this was a Narangarup earthquake again that kicked off in August. These are the seismic waves at some of our Kimberley sites. So it took us 3 days to drive up there. The P waves cover the same ground in about 3.5 minutes. And we've been changing over, Telstra changing their network that affects our telemetry. So we've recently put some of them, we're testing low Earth orbit Terraria communications. I'll wrap it up there. Thank you.